Romeo, Romeo, wherefore art thou, Romeo? Come what, come may, I do adore thee. I cannot do without my Lord Robert, for he is like my little dog. For God so loved me, I only desire to live in the world for your sake. All these quotes are about love, passionate, deep and intense love. And certainly in the time of Shakespeare, it was a love that did dare speak its name. And thanks to the bard's writing, to diaries, letters and courtly documents, we can have a fairly good opinion of attitudes towards sex in the time of Shakespeare. So if I have pricked your attention, if your quill is ready, come back with me and let's discover sex in the time of Shakespeare. I'm here on London's Bankside, where both the Curtain Theatre and the Globe are located. In Shakespeare's days, these streets would have been bustling with tannery workers, tavern workers, prostitutes. It was a den of iniquity. And in this rebel place, Shakespeare lived, worked, and loved. And talking of love, the delineation between love and friendship is much clearer today than it was in Shakespeare's time. And certainly in the written word, they were more fluid and interchangeable between like and love. So from an LGBTQ plus perspective, we need to be careful when we're trying to look for evidence of same-sex relationships. Using the word love could mean romance, but it could also be a form of flattery or courtly language. And it could even be used to describe a business deal. In our society, we have a concept of a BFF, which is often seen as a female relationship, rather like Carrie Bradshaw and her gal pals in Sex and the City. However, in Shakespeare's day, the BFF was very much a male preserve, and men were not afraid to describe their relationships intensely in writing or to display affection towards each other in public. And we must remember that women didn't have the freedom that men had in Shakespeare's day. They couldn't simply go to a tavern like this one in Bankside. With no ready meals and no ready contraceptive, they were often at home looking after the kitchen or looking after the children. And if women were seen out wandering along the streets of London, it was most likely that they were prostitutes or working girls. So no respectable woman would be seen out with a friend or on her own in public. So let's go on to discuss sleeping arrangements. It was not uncommon in Shakespeare's day for people not in a relationship to share a bed. Remember, there was no central heating. Coal and kindling was incredibly expensive and it was cold. During Shakespeare's lifetime, the Thames actually froze over. So, with all of this sharing beds, with people writing letters to each other, declaring their undying love, and with men expressing affection towards each other in public, was it a safe environment for LGBTQ plus people? Is the notion hiding in plain sight true then as it is now? No. These were not safe times to be LGBTQ+. Despite the fact that James I was carrying on with the Duke of Buckingham, sodomy was a hanging offence. Now, sodomy did not mean then what it means now. It covered a whole host of crimes, including bestiality. And in fact, whilst it did cover the male sexual act, there is a rather famous court case where a man got a little bit drunk, gave a speech on a balcony, placed his genitals in a glass for dramatic effect. He was arrested, charged and convicted of committing sodomy. And what was Shakespeare's attitudes towards LGBTQ plus people? Well, in his writing, he clearly shows that he was aware of a multitude of genders and sexualities. Many scholars argue that, in fact, Antonio in The Merchant of Venice is in love with Bassanio. And in Twelfth Night, Antonio rescues Sebastian from the waves and describes his love for him as sharp as filetted steel. And who can forget in Henry V, when the Duke of York kisses the dying Suffolk on the lips and begs that his soul flies with him to heaven. A scene so romantic that it moves the king to tears. Yes, Shakespeare's plays, if you look, are littered with LGBTQ plus people. And don't get me started on the sonnets, which are 14 lines of love filled with puns on the male appendage, sleepless nights and deep jealousy. The subject of the sonnets, a dark lady and a sweet youth. So was Shakespeare declaring himself to be a bisexual in the sonnets? I'm not so sure. Just because he could imagine loving a boy or imagine loving a girl doesn't mean he actually loved either. You know, he could understand and empathize with Othello, but that doesn't mean he was a Moor in Venice. And who was the sweet boy? Was he the mysterious WH, the subject of the dedication of the sonnets? Were the sonnets in fact dedicated to a lover or a patron? People have argued for centuries about who Shakespeare dedicated the sonnets to. Oscar Wilde suggested they were a young boy in Shakespeare's acting troupe, and other scholars have suggested the Earl of Pembroke or the Earl of Southampton. Fact is, we'll probably never know, but what we do know is that in the original couple of editions of the sonnets, the male pronoun is extensively used. However, in subsequent editions, the male pronoun is replaced with the female pronoun. And this particularly gathered pace during the Victorian age. But that's no surprise. They were so repressed anyway. So what do we know of Shakespeare's own sex life? Well, we know that he married Anne Hathaway in a hurry. She was already pregnant, and baby Susanna was born 6 months after the wedding day. He left for the bright lights of London at 21. However, before he left, he had already fathered 2 children. They never divorced, and they are buried together in separate but adjoining graves. Now, there is evidence that he may have committed adultery whilst he was in London, but let's face it, writers and actors hung out in taverns on Bankside, which often doubled as brothels, so there was quite a lot of temptation within his way. When his time in London was over, he returned to Stratford, and much has been made that when he died in Stratford, he left Anne his second best bed. But this wasn't, in fact, a slight. The best bed in a house was usually reserved for the guest. The second best bed often referred to the marriage bed. So Will was simply making sure that Anne inherited her bed. And if you dig a little deeper, it's actually quite touching. As a widow, she was entitled already to 1/3 of his property. So by mentioning the bed in his will, Shakespeare was making a final, beautiful and romantic gesture to a constant and dearly loved wife.